Well, here we are for another Tropical Weather Bulletin, and we have one thing active at the moment, and that is Tropical Storm Darby, which formed last night and has strengthened since up to 65 miles an hour as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. That brings us up to 35 storms so far this year. The average for the entire year is 92. Going into the North Atlantic, it is day 41 of hurricane season, and we have a 30% chance of formation in the Gulf of Mexico. And strangely, this has reminded a lot of people about Barry 2019, given the fact it started from a land system and then went into the Gulf of Mexico, and then eventually it went again. I guess I can see why the similarity is being made. In the Eastern Pacific, it's day 58 of the season there, and we have Tropical Storm Darby, along with a new area of interest with a 50% chance of formation to the south of Mexico. That could become the next system in several days. Western Pacific, we have Invest 99 and 90W. 99W has failed and is now down to a 0% chance of formation, and 90W chances are decreasing due to the fact that it isn't looking as likely to develop. Models have held back on it, and as such, the chances have gone down with it. In the North Indian Ocean, it is looking pretty quiet here. Nothing to foresee in the coming days or even weeks at this point. Although there is something funny going on in the southwestern Indian Ocean, you'll see what's going on there in the Scilly Range side of things. But right now, definitely nothing anytime soon. Here's a satellite imagery on Tropical Storm Darby, and you can see it's a pretty small cyclone, but it's getting itself organized quite well over the last 24 hours here. Yesterday when it was designated, it looked like it had a eye feature because of what was going on, so it was definitely interesting. But regardless, intensification is likely to become a hurricane in the next 12 to 24 hours. Here's the Atlantic satellite imagery. You can see what's going on here. The disturbance they're going to be monitoring the Gulf of Mexico is over Georgia currently. Other than that, it's looking pretty quiet. Eastern Atlantic's got nothing going on. And in the Eastern Pacific, you can see what's going on with Darby. It's a pretty small storm. It's like that disturbance to the east of it, to the south of Mexico, is much larger. But that's not going to be the one that's developing. The one that's going to be developing is going to be coming off from the Central America coastline, more than likely. In the Western Pacific, you can see 99W and its disorganized mess to the south of the Hainan Peninsula, and then you can also see 90W to the east of the Philippines. It's got some convection, but it's very disorganized and very messy, to say at the very least. North Indian Ocean, the monsoonal pattern is continuing with the Bay of Bengal and central and southern India getting soaked. Western Arabian Sea is a bit drier than it was in previous days. Southwestern Indian Ocean is looking pretty dry, as it has been for this time of year. All the clouds are pretty much confined to the lower latitudes. Some cirrus clouds continuing to be seen near the Madagascar coastline, however. Australia looking pretty dry, not much going on at the moment. All the rain that there was a few days ago is pretty much off the coast now. New Caledonia, though, is getting some rain along with New Zealand. In the Eastern Pacific, the sea surface temperatures look like this, 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, although you can start to see the cool wave that was left behind by Hurricane Bonnie a few days ago. The Gulf of Mexico looks like that, 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, with a lot of 30 degrees Celsius temperatures over spreading the region. Very good for that area of interest that we're going to be seeing try to develop near the Gulf Coast there. And the Caribbean is looking around 27 to 28, same thing for the Atlantic, and same thing for the main development region. Going into the Arabian Sea, it's around 28 to 29, closer to the immediate coastline. However, decreases to 25 and 24 as you head southwestwards. Bay of Bengal is around 28 to 29 throughout the entirety of the basin, and as you head into the Western Pacific, it's around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius. The temperatures still haven't really recovered from Chapa and Irie's presence over the last few days. The southern hemisphere looking pretty cool, around 25 to 26 across the northwestern Australian region, and decreasing to around 23 to 24 as you go further southwest into the southwestern Indian Ocean. Sea surface temperature anomalies look like this. Atlantic is looking above average. Eastern Atlantic, however, is starting to see some of those below average spots in the subtropics, especially near the Azores. Eastern Pacific is looking near average. Western Pacific is looking above average, and the Bay of Bengal is looking above average, but the Arabian Sea is starting to seem below average. Starting to see some interesting differences here. In terms of the ocean heat content, that dead spot in the Eastern Atlantic, the Eastern Gulf of Mexico, I should say, continues, with the Caribbean still producing more ocean heat content, especially to the south of Cuba, while in the Western Pacific, we still have that massive blob of high ocean heat content that extends far from the Philippines, starting from the coastline. Eastern Pacific still looking pitiful with little to no accumulated cyclone energy still. Looking at the model runs, we're starting off with the Atlantic because, of course, anytime we have a thing in the Atlantic, we always kind of see what's going on there just to appease the gazillions of people who like to watch the Atlantic. You can see that the GFS does not end up developing anything from Mexico from the AOI, but you do see something in the Eastern Pacific. We'll get on that, but there is nothing on the day 5, at least on the GFS side of things. Going into the Pacific, let me do that real quick and see what ends up what we've been tracking. Obviously, Darby is a topic of discussion. It looks like it could be strengthening a bit more, probably peaking in about 36 hours before weakening does ensue due to the fact that we are going to be seeing that cool water and dry air. Obviously, ends up taking a bit for it to weaken. It could cross over into the Central Pacific briefly, but it will be dying by that point as that Eastern Pacific AOI begins to develop, and we could be seeing unsurprisingly, another hurricane out of that because that's what the GFS always wants for any kind of Pacific storm, regardless of whether it actually has any chance of becoming a hurricane or not. Going into the Western Pacific, you can see what goes on with that, and it's kind of not much to say at the very least. The 99W does not develop at all. It ends up being this very, very large mess instead. And then with 90W, you can see that while there is a closed isobar, it doesn't really get that strong, and assuming that GFS goes aggressive and everything, that's basically the equivalent of not developing it, and if it does develop into something, it's pretty much probably going to be nothing but a weak pile of garbage. So needless to say, chances are dropping on both systems at this point, and which is good news, especially considering the fact that initially it looked like they were formed to track the Chaba and Irie. Thankfully, it looks like those storms are not materializing any further. Looking at the longer range, we kick it off with the day 5 point, which is where the Eastern Pacific disturbance continues to get itself in shape, and it looks like it strengthens. Unsurprisingly, becomes a Category 3 by the GFS, because that's basically what they're doing by every single storm now. And eventually, it seems it's going to stay okay. So finally, after about 2 days of maintaining Category 2 to 3 strength, it should begin to weaken. Okay, never mind. It's just... why is it staying 960 to just 970s and just staying that way through the entire... okay, now it's weakening. Yeah, I don't see that happening. It's definitely not going to be staying a Cat 2 3 that long. Just cancel that run again. I'm not sure why the GFS wants everything to be a Cat 3 in the Eastern Pacific. But going back to 120 and switching it over to the Western Pacific, you can see what ends up going on after hour 120. And it's a lot of nothing. For once, there's really nothing going on in the long range of the Western Pacific. So it looks like the Eastern Pacific is the only thing that's got stuff going on in the long range side of things. Here's our shameless plug. You can visit the Force 13 store. We've got a bunch of new merch to celebrate 1,000 days with no Hone. As the someone who has endorsed it, go check it out. We've also got pillows if you feel that you need to be sticking to the classics with generic stuff only. And for the silly range, never did I think I'd be having to say this on July 11th of all days, but we're looking at the Southwest Indian Ocean for the silly range, and I think me saying that is enough to basically say why we're looking at that for the silly range. Starting at hour 240, you can see that low pressure there with 1,004 millibars. Start to do the funny. Basically decides to casually become a tropical cyclone. 988 millibars is what it ended up peaking at, before it begins to finally weaken and still lasts for a few days before eventually finally dying. Yet no, it is July, the Southern Hemisphere season is over, and it's past hour 240, so you know what, we're gonna be taking this as an absolutely not happening run, and call it a day there. None of the other models are drunk, because it looks like everything else is quiet for the foreseeable future in the Northern Hemisphere, after this Eastern Pacific disturbance. On this day, it was a much more chaotic situation in the Western Pacific, where we had 3 typhoons going on. We had Super Typhoon Rita, of course, that's gonna get one person of ours, at least in the contributor side of things. We also had Typhoon Phyllis, which was peaking and about to start weakening, and there was also Typhoon Susan, which would eventually be making landfall in China shortly. Rita ended up being the version which would be a completely erratic track and last quite a while, and there was nothing going on elsewhere. There was a gap in between 2 depressions in the Atlantic. The Eastern Pacific would be quiet for some time. You can find more of our products powered by Cyclone History by going to the bottom bar tag below. that being said, in the Atlantic, the next two names here are Danielle followed by Earl. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking out for Estelle and Frank. And in the Central Pacific, there are 1,001 places to see and go before Hone forms. In the Western Pacific, we're looking out for Songda, followed by Trazes. The North Indian Ocean, the next two names here are Citrang, followed by Mandas. And that appears to be two more names that I will be saying for quite some time here. Going on into the Southern Hemisphere, starting off with the Australian region, the next name here is Darian, followed by Elliot. In the Southwestern Indian Ocean, we're looking out for Ashley and Belita. And in the South Pacific,